It is 12 o'clock, so I'm going to make a start. I'd just like to welcome you all to this Wessex Museum's Lunchtime Share. My name is Christina Broughton. I am the former CEO of Wessex Museums, and therefore I am a guest host for today's talk. But it's lovely to be here today and to welcome you all to the talk. A bit about the Lunchtime Shares to start with. The programme has been devised by Wessex Museums as an opportunity to share and learn from the work that's going on in our partner museums and across the partnership more broadly. And whilst the sessions are designed for colleagues who work in the Wessex Museums partnership, as part of Wessex Museums' wider advocacy and support role in the sector, we'll be recording the Lunchtime Share presentation and sharing it more widely through our YouTube channel so that others across the sector can benefit from today's talk. So just a couple of housekeeping bits before we crack on with the talk. First of all, I can see you're all beautifully muted and your cameras are off. If you could please keep that the case during the talk. And when we get to the Q&A, you are very, very welcome to turn on your camera. It'd be lovely to see your faces. And also, if you do have a question during the Q&A, feel free to unmute and ask your question. We do have closed captioning available on this talk, and it can be turned on if you go to More in your menu and select Language and Speech and then Show Live Captions. If you do have any problems, you can message Claire Brown, who's here on the call with us today as well, providing technical support. Please do use the chat function throughout the talk to comment or raise any questions you might have. There will be about 15 minutes at the end for the Q&A session. If questions come to you through the talk, please pop them in the chat. I'll be keeping track of them. But equally, when we get to the Q&A, if a question drops into your mind at that point, please feel free to pop up your hand or unmute and you can ask your question live. You can also use the chat function, of course, if you are having any technical issues, and please direct those to Claire, who's here to support the talk today. And just finally, we'd really, really appreciate your feedback after today's talk. A link to a very short survey is going to appear in the chat at the end of the session. You'll also be emailed a link to the session feedback form, and I just encourage you please to fill it in because it really helps Wessex Museums to shape the future talks we have through the Lunchtime Shares programme. So that is it for the housekeeping bits, which is great because I'm really, really excited about this talk about the Queer in Wiltshire project. And it's my pleasure to welcome Friday Schoemaker here today. So Friday is the project officer for the Queer in Wiltshire project, which has been happening over at Wiltshire Museum. And she previously also ran the Queering Wiltshire Heritage Project, which was funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and also by Wessex Museums. So welcome, Friday, and it's over to you. We're looking forward to hearing about your project.
Hiya, I'm Friday. My pronouns are they, them. Just to describe what I look like. I am a white person in my mid-20s. I have brown hair and a mullet, and I am wearing a floral Lucy and Yak like jumpsuit type thing. And I will. There we go. So today I will be talking you through our Queering Wiltshire pilot project, which ran from November 2024 until early January 2025 and resulted in our LGBTQIA+ heritage booklet, which you can see on the screen. So how it worked, when creating this project, I had a couple of very specific goals. I think there's a common misconception that being LGBTQI+ is a new, modern thing, and that there are not a lot of queer people in the countryside and areas like Wiltshire. And it was very important to me to show that this was both incorrect and that we have always been here. So I wanted to create an accessible and interesting LGBTQI+ heritage resource that showcased both contemporary and historical queer stories and identities. Secondly, there are not enough specifically queer safe spaces for LGBTQI+ people in Wiltshire and across the country, really. And having a safe space to fully be yourself and explore your identity around people who have similar experiences and to understand and respect your queerness can be really validating and life-changing. And in doing queer research and working with the LGBTQI+ community, it has been very obvious that LGBTQI+ people in Wiltshire are in desperate need of more safe spaces like this. Therefore, I wanted to create a safe space for our LGBTQIA+ visitors through our events and activities. And when I first started working at Wiltshire Museum early last year, I asked if we had any queer stories in our archive or collections, and was told that there was no record of any. And this is when I decided I wanted a queer Wiltshire Museum. With thousands of years of history told for over 1 million objects, I knew there were queer stories in our collections, and I was very determined to find them. So through the Queering Wiltshire project, I was able to do this. And once I knew what my goals for this project were, I basically brainstormed how I could make this happen. I wanted to create a booklet of LGBTQI+ stories across Wiltshire that I could find through queer research in our collections, oral history interviews with people who had grown up or were living in the Wiltshire area, and some new, specifically LGBTQI+ acquisitions. I also really wanted to host a couple of creative queer workshops specifically to create a community and safe space for our queer visitors and give them a chance to contribute to the project by sharing their work if they weren't comfortable doing something like an oral history interview. And in creating this project, I really focused on accessibility and ensuring the project had a lasting impact. I decided to do this by making the booklet free and available online for anyone to download, and as a physical booklet that will be available at the museum. Carefully recording all of our findings and having this physical as well as digital resource that captured all of the queer stories we had collected would help ensure a lasting impact. And establishing a social media presence by creating an Instagram profile specifically for this project was an important part of promoting the Queer in Wiltshire project. It allowed our visitors to easily access information about the project and queer events at the museum. It also gave us a platform to place call-outs for oral history interviews and new queer acquisitions. So finding queer stories in your collections when you don't really have any yet can feel like quite a challenge, especially when you are doing the work by yourself or in a small team. And what really helped me uncover queer stories at a museum was looking for well-known LGBTQIA+ historical figures and finding their connections to Wiltshire. The first queer person I looked at in this way was the first modern lesbian, Anne Lister, also known as Gentleman Jack. I knew she was quite an avid traveller, and in doing research using Google Books and small history blogs and her own archive diaries, I found that she had several connections to Wiltshire. Another way we found queer stories in our collections was by looking at queer authors and artists and seeing if we had any of their works in our archive. In doing this, I discovered we had several books written by famous LGBTQI+ authors like Siegfried Sassoon, Cecil Beaton, and Stephen Tennant. And these books had been in our collections for decades, but their queer context had never been explored or recorded. And it's important to remember that an object does not have to be specifically queer or explicitly linked to an LGBTQIA+ person for it to be part of the queer stories in your collections. By finding and recording the queer context of objects, you can also queer them. In doing queer research in our archives, I discovered some really interesting stories, and I found a copy of a poetry book written and signed by queer artist Stephen Tennant. I also discovered Virginia Woolf's sister had been married to a man living in Seand, and we had several objects related to his family and a photo album belonging to his sister as well. And I found a fantastic Victorian biography of a well-known sapphic couple written by one of their distant relatives, detailing the romantic friendship between the two. A few weeks into our Queer Heritage project last year, I was contacted by someone who wanted to donate some specifically LGBTQIA plus items to the museum. And this included items related to the anti-homophobic bullying CT campaign from the early 2010s, as well as a rainbow cape created for Devices Carnival 2011 by a small local youth group. And by promoting the project online on our social media and encouraging word of mouth promotion, we were able to acquire these LGBTQIA plus objects, which were the first in our collection. So collecting oral histories was an essential part of this project, as these are stories that remain largely unexplored and underrepresented. And by recording and sharing these stories, we promote queer visibility and representation and a better understanding of queer histories and queer identities. While our project only ran for 2.5 months, we were contacted by several people wanting to share their stories. The booklet captures the wide spectrum of identities and experiences recorded through these oral history interviews. We interviewed several trans and non-binary people, as well as gay men, bisexual and pansexual people, and my story as a non-binary lesbian. And our oldest interviewee was born in 1937, and his story, A Lifetime of Change, demonstrated just that. And when recording and sharing queer oral history interviews, it is really important to protect your participants. We chose to only share our participants' first names publicly to protect our identity, and sharing pictures of yourself was optional, and we were just very careful in sharing information about them. And finding participants for LGBTQIA plus oral history interviews can be quite a challenging task. It's very important to show your visitors that you are a queer inclusive space and that you are dedicated to sharing and recording LGBTQIA plus stories. And promoting your project online and increasing queer visibility in your museum will help you find more participants. Additionally, encouraging participants to share your project or work with their queer friends and family can be really helpful in finding more interviewees. As I mentioned, it was very important to me to host some queer events as part of this LGBTQI plus heritage project. This included a queer zine making workshop, a badge and collage making workshop, and a queer crafts and chats session. These creative events allowed participants to explore and share their identities and stories in a comfortable and validating environment and connect with their community. And from what participants told me, it also really helped improve their well-being, which is essential because research shows that mental health issues are a lot more queer people suffer with mental health issues, statistically speaking. So running these events and advertising them online and at the museum as specifically queer events increased queer visibility at the museum and helped us collect more content for our LGBTQIA plus heritage booklet. When I was planning this project, I expected to create a 10 to maybe 15-page booklet, and the Queer in Wiltshire booklet ended up being a 56-page book. Finding all of these stories in just 2.5 months further demonstrates that there are so many queer stories just hidden away, waiting to be found in archives, collections, and heritage spaces. Our Queer Heritage booklet is an anthology of historical and contemporary queer stories. It features articles about queer work done at the museum, including a small exhibition we did last year of the first queer stories found at the museum, what we call Queer Stories at Wiltshire Museum, which showcase LGBTQI plus histories found in our archive and collections, and were originally shared on our Queer in Wiltshire Instagram account. Oral history interviews with queer people across the Wiltshire area, and collages, badges, and other works created by our LGBTQIA plus visitors. And this project and the booklet were met with an overwhelmingly positive response. Participants said, "We need so much more of this to balance the actual history of our community," and the project was an incredible, personal, and inspiring experience. And since releasing the booklet in March, nearly 3/4 of all the physical copies we have printed off have already been picked up by visitors, and participants have shared the booklet with relatives across the world. So in running this project, we encountered a couple of challenges. Firstly, 2.5 months is not a lot of time, and creating a booklet alongside running multiple events was arguably an ambitious plan. And if you are creating an LGBTQIA plus resource like this, make sure you set enough time to design it. Because for me, this is my first project like this. I spent a lot of time collecting the stories and then realized I still had to design the booklet, which took me quite a while. The booklet ended up being about 5 times longer than I was expecting it to be, which was obviously really good. While working on the booklet in late December, so towards the end of the project, I was contacted by 3 more people wanting to share their stories, which were then recorded online in early January 2025. And additionally, 2 days before finishing the booklet, I discovered a significant queer story in the archive, which was subsequently added to the book. So flexibility is essential in running a project like this because you never know what you'll find, and you also don't know how much information you're going to find. When we announced this project, we were prepared to receive some negative comments, unfortunately. And when running an LGBTQIA plus heritage or community project, make sure you have a statement ready, emphasizing the importance of your project, your dedication to queer visibility and representation, and confidently showing that you have the full support and backing of your institution. And one thing I did not quite anticipate when planning this project was the impact these negative comments and the oral history interviews would have on my mental health. And on the screen, you will find the content warnings for our booklet, which include things like internalized homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia, homophobic slurs, abuse, outing, death, loss, AIDS and HIV, and mental health issues, and a lot more things like that. And it's important to include these content warnings when you are sharing your work and remind readers to be mindful of these and read safely and responsibly. And these content warnings also really demonstrate the difficult stories you might record as part of a project like this. So when running a project like this, make sure you have a plan in place to protect your mental health, because obviously I was aware I would find not just positive things, but I didn't realize quite the impact that it would have on me as a queer person as well. So as part of my Wessex Museum's case study, I created a guide to running LGBTQIA plus heritage projects, which can be found on the Wessex Museum's website. And in this guide, you will find advice for queering your museum and queer projects, planning a project like this, protecting your own and queer visitors' mental health, dealing with negative comments, finding queer stories in your archive and collections, and finding participants, hosting events, and using social media to promote your project. And I think the most important lesson in all of that is that queering your museum takes time, but don't be discouraged if things are slow. And LGBTQI plus stories are all around us. You just have to find them. So I hope this has been helpful. And thank you all for listening.
Wow, great talk, Friday. Thank you so much. There was so much in that. I've taken 2 pages of notes. I'm struggling to keep up with it all, but It's been amazing to hear in more detail about the project and all the work you've done with the queer community in Wiltshire. So thank you for sharing that with us. For the audience, if you do have questions for Friday, please do pop them in the chat, because we are going to go into the Q&A. And Friday, you've obviously provided through this talk a huge amount of practical advice on, how to identify queer stories in your collections, good advice about how to manage potential negative comments that come back about the project. And really importantly, at the end there, you touched on the need to protect your mental health, but also, I'm sure that of others in the museum. And I'm sure your guide is an incredibly useful document. So look forward to looking at that. Thank you. I'm going to just kick off the Q&A, but before I do that, I realized that I forgot to self-describe at the start of my introduction. So I'll do that now. So I am a middle-aged woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, and today I'm wearing a bright green top. Right, so some questions, a few popping into the chat now, but let me kick us off. I just wondered, Friday, what the response has been from visitors to the museum, or indeed online audiences to the project. Has there been much negativity, or have you found there's been, more support and positive feedback? Should we start there?
I think I was very pleasantly surprised by how positive feedback has been. Like I said, we were kind of going into this prepared to deal with negative comments, because unfortunately that is how the world is right now, and there's a lot going on. So that is why it's very important to have your statement ready. But we found that we definitely had negative comments which we dealt with, and it was really good to have our statement ready. But overall, the response has been really incredible, and we've had really positive comments from both queer people and non-queer people, and the people we have worked with have come back for other events and continue to support the project. We are currently running the Just Queer in Wiltshire project, funded by the Community Fund, which will run till August, I think. And a lot of people that were part of the original Queer in Wiltshire project have come back for this one and continue to talk about the booklet and share it with their friends and family. So it's been really great.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And I'm glad to hear it, because I mean, obviously, did you notice any change, with the recent Supreme Court ruling, for example, which just has landed right at this moment, in the middle of your project? Was there any impact of that wider kind of media and publicity that related back to how people were responding to your project?
I think within our group of participants and people who have worked with the project, I would say that is kind of where we're hearing more about that, because obviously those are the people whose lives it impacts. And a lot of people are really scared and nervous and really need community and safe spaces in a time like this. Yeah, it's obviously really difficult and horrible, and so I'm glad that our project, if anything, it's not changing the world right now, but it's definitely giving people a space to go and connect with their community and find comfort and maybe a bit of hope as well.
Well, these things are important, however small. So yeah, so well done for that. I've got little steps, says Becky in the chat. Absolutely. Question from Jenny in the chat. She asks, is there a particular story or artifact that inspired or influenced you significantly from your project, and would you be prepared to share with the group?
I think when I went through some of my highlights of my findings, I would say definitely those. So when I found the book signed by Stephen Tennant, um, on Modes, there's a tiny note that says it's signed. It doesn't say it on our search for collections bit on the Wiltshire Museum website. So when I opened the book, I was really shocked to find that it was signed, and it was really special to me because it was just a reminder that like these were real people like me and like other contemporary queer people. And it was really powerful just seeing like the actual writing and the way it was like, when you turn the page and you can see that someone has written something on the previous page, and it was like, oh, that real person wrote that. So that was quite impactful for me. And then, like I said, the biography of the Sapphic couple in Wales, um, that was just personally quite inspiring. And it was really interesting. I really like researching Victorian culture and fashion. So like seeing a Victorian perspective of like an early 19th century, late 18th century sapphic relationship was really interesting. The way he was like, oh, they were really good friends, and they were not masculine, actually. They were actually really feminine, and also best friends who were just so like feminine that they only wanted each other's company as women. So it was really interesting to read and quite fun as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Do keep your questions coming, audience, in the chat, please, if you will. Friday, you touched on the impact it had on you, this project, in terms of your own mental health, and the need to sort of care for that, and perhaps it's in your guide. But I wonder if there's any advice you could offer about how the museums could ensure that there is that support in place for people working on projects like this from the beginning.
I think for us, like I didn't quite realize, like I said, what the impact was going to be like. So we didn't really have a specific plan in place before I started this. So I think it's already a good step to make sure that you have thought about this specifically. Um, Make sure that if you do oral history interviews, you give yourself like 10-ish minutes after to just go for a walk and clear your head. And I know that sounds really simple, but it can be really helpful. Make sure you have your colleagues around you to talk to, and know that if you need to talk to someone, that there is someone there to talk to about all of this, because it can be a lot, and it's especially difficult when it's from stories from people within your own community. So I think, yeah, those are really important things, and just trying to find community and support when you need it. Maybe look online to see if there's specific like mental health support or organizations that might be helpful for you. I know there's in the back, I forgot to mention this, but in the back of the booklet I've included a list of resources, which basically shows LGBTQIA plus groups and mental health support in the Wiltshire area and nationally as well. So using things like that can be really helpful.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. And I think, that rings true for any of the underserved communities we might be working with. And what's so inspiring about your project is how the museum has now connected with the LGBTQ plus community, which they hadn't done before in a meaningful way, and now that it continues to build. So I mean, that's just a real success story from this project. So another question in the chat, did you use volunteers at the museum to help research or collate the content at all?
Because this is only a 2.5 month project, this project was primarily just me. So we didn't have any volunteers. For our current project, the Queer in Wiltshire project, which the previous project funded by the Six Museums was a pilot project for, we are working with a small advisory group to look for queer stories in the archives, who are doing that on a voluntary basis. But no, for the original project, we just didn't have the resources for it, unfortunately. I wish we had, but we didn't.
So how have you recruited, for lack of a better word, these volunteers to work on the current project? Yes, and Becky, to add to that, who is part of the advisory group, if you can say? So tell us more about this group.
The advisory group, like I said, social media, very helpful for placing call outs. So that is how we found people for our advisory group, as well as through connecting with local LGBTQI plus groups that were already well established. So our advisory group, basically, our members were either found through our social media and promotion through social media, or by connecting with local community groups. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. And which leads me nicely on to another one of my questions was, and maybe it was a similar approach. I wondered how you structured the call outs for the contemporary collecting, the oral histories, and how you publicized the events. I mean, you talked about with the events, I think you talked about um, using online promotion and in the museum. But I wondered if you had any more of a targeted approach with any of those, how you sort of structured those call outs and promotional activity.
I think all of these are still up on our Instagram. So if you do want some, not inspiration, but if you want to see what we did for this project, it's just instagram.com/queer, one word. Um, But basically, I think in doing things like this, it's very important, like I said, make it like explicitly queer, use queer, LGBTQI plus, etc., to increase visibility, and so people know that like this is a safe space for queer people, and you are not shying away from making it very clear that this is a queer project and for the queer community. Um, yeah, our previous project, because it was quite a short project, we started off with this is the project post, and we included ways in which people could participate, and that is where kind of the call-outs came in. So we were like, oh, contact us if you want to share your story, or if you want to come to one of the events and share your story by sharing your creations. So I think, yeah, doing things like that and having, for me, it's been really helpful to have like a clear brand in a way. If you look at our Instagram, it's all quite cohesive. Um, so it's quite recognizable as being part of this project. Um, yeah, I think just promoting it online and include as much information as you can. Always include your email and make sure it's very easy to find.
All very good advice. So just jumping back, and sorry, Becky, I missed this as I was talking, but jumping back to your advisory group, follow-on question is, are all your volunteers from your peer community in your advisory
Um,
group?
yeah, all of our advisory group members are also queer.
Thank you. Okay, another question. You mentioned using objects in the collection that didn't have such clear connections to LGBTQIA plus people or stories. Could you go into this a bit more? How did you go about selecting these less obvious objects and telling stories with them?
So like I said, this is kind of where it's good to already have some pre-existing knowledge of queer stories. And so I will take Anne Lister as an example because she's the first one that I found like connections to Wiltshire for, and coincidentally, her stories, none of them were like explicitly queer objects. So what I did for Anne Lister was I knew she was queer. And I basically did a bit of a deep dive trying to look for things like Anne Lister in Wiltshire, Anne Lister in Salisbury, or like specific places in Wiltshire, specific like landmarks, things like Stonehenge. And by doing that, I found a lot of connections there. So then we had, as part of her story, we had a photograph of Stonehenge from around the time when Anne Lister was alive, which a photograph of Stonehenge is not necessarily queer, but by saying this is what Stonehenge looked like when Anne Lister was alive and when she saw it, that kind of created a queer context. We also found connections to Ramsbury Manor, which is in Wiltshire, and Anne Lister had, for about 2 decades, she had a relationship with a woman called Mariana Rawton, and diary entries from Anne's diary show that Mariana spent some time living at Ramsbury Manor. So by finding that connection, we were able to link it to our archive as well through a 1923 photograph of Ramsbury Manor from our archive. And lastly, we found that Anne was an avid reader, and she also read works by Wiltshire-based antiquarian Sir Richard Coldcore, and we have several of his books in our archive as well. So we were able to link those and also read what she described as Horace's Antiquities of Wiltshire, a storehouse of antiquarian lore. So none of these objects are specifically queer, but by finding these connections through looking for specific words, specific places, specific people, you can queer them by linking them to queer people and queer stories and queer relationships and things like that.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left if anyone's got a last burning question, but whilst we're waiting on that, Friday, so maybe, and I know a bit about this, but maybe I can ask you, what next? What are your plans for the project moving forward?
Well, right now, as I said, we are running the Queer in Wiltshire project, which is a community project as opposed to a heritage project, which is what the previous one was. So it's a bunch of events and activities, and they're all free, which is very fun. Got workshops with professional artists, which is very exciting. More about this can also be found on our Instagram. And as for what comes after that, we would really like to create a more Wessex-wide queer project like the Queer in Wiltshire project. So we are currently exploring that and seeing what we could possibly do with that.
Which is really exciting, and I really hope that the other partner museums will be keen to be a part of something like that. And for those of you who are here today, have been inspired by the work that Friday's undertaken at Wiltshire Museum. But yeah, congratulations, Friday. It's been a brilliant project. Already a big yes from Paul. Thank you, Becky. Lovely to hear that. So yeah, I look forward to seeing where this goes. Thank you very much once again for a really great talk today, packed full of information. I hope you're all looking in the chat, but just to highlight, there are some links in the chat, including to the case study that Friday's created on the Wessex Museum's website. There's a link to the Queering Wiltshire booklet that Friday referred to in their talk, and there is also a link to the Instagram for the project that you can find in the chat. So do have a look at those if you want to know more. And obviously, I think you're in touch with Friday. If not, you can reach out to other colleagues at Wiltshire Museum or at Wessex Museums, and we can put you in touch with Friday. Thank you. Thank you so much, Friday. So that brings us to the end of this lunchtime share. I hope you've all enjoyed Friday's talk today. Thank you very much for joining us. We are planning to continue the Lunchtime Shares programme, and we're hoping for another talk in the autumn, in September, PBC at the moment, but we've got a few things lined up. So please watch this space. And as ever, we will be publicising future talks through the Wessex Museum's newsletter and also via direct mail to the museum. So keep an eye out for a talk in September. Claire has popped a link in the chat to the feedback form I mentioned earlier. Please just take a minute or two, if you wouldn't mind, to fill in for the form so that we can continue to improve this programme. Lots of thanks and praise in the chat, Friday. I hope you're seeing all of that. Congratulations again. And thanks all very much for joining us today. And we hope to see you at the next talk or elsewhere very soon.